Hello and welcome to another edition of the MiamiHal Real Estate Show. I am Hal Feldman, and as always, have a great guest with me today. It is an attorney. His name is Dennis Haber, and Dennis does a whole lot of everything, is what you're going to find out. But specifically, we're going to talk about his involvement in real estate and probate, two things that when they get together can cause some problems. So first of all, welcome, Dennis. Nice to have you.
Good afternoon, Hal.
This is our audience out here.
Good afternoon, audience.
And I do want to remind them that all through this entire live session, they're welcome to ask questions via their little chat window there. And even after this is not live and it's available on demand, please ask your questions there. Dennis and I will be happy afterwards to go back in and address questions that way as well. So, Dennis, thanks for joining us on the show.
Absolutely.
You're an attorney here. You're local. Where's your offices?
My office is down just on the backside of Starbucks at 148th and US 1.
Okay, so you keep yourself juiced in Starbucks and you're ready to go at a moment's notice.
No, I'm not a Starbucks fan, quite frankly, but everybody else seems to be. So the area develops quite a crowd.
Okay. We've been told just pull that microphone up a little closer to you and we'll hear you even better.
There you go.
After the squeak. Anyway, so what I'd like to do is, as you know, I'm a real estate agent, very active in the area. And most of the time, we can get a real estate transaction to go through without really significant any legal issues. However, as soon as we hear the word probate, and that sometimes comes up even as a surprise, then things take a little bit of a turn where we have to really slow down and understand what's going on. So your involvement in probate and real estate makes you uniquely qualified to kind of talk about this today, correct?
Well, in some sense, the concept of real estate and probate are one and the same. I refer to it as the double D law, death and dirt, because that's what it's all about.
Wow. Okay.
Probate by its very nature and is dealing with both the concepts of intangible asset as well as tangible, meaning real property as opposed to personal property, but both have to be addressed in probate.
Okay. So I think the word probate to some might even be a foreign term. If somebody is in their senior years and they're readying themselves and their property for when they're no longer with us, what should they be doing so that there potentially is no probate, and then define probate for us?
Well, watch out for that phrase in the later areas of their life. It's truthfully not the best time to do it because often we find ourselves living longer. The average age now is, well, my father's 97 and he's still playing golf.
That's fabulous.
People are living longer. That said, good plans are well thought out plans, and well thought out plans should start when you're younger, not when you're older and a little bit perhaps incapacitated. The biggest problem we have lately is not ironically dying. It's what happens if you don't die. Alzheimer's, other physical diseases that keep our mind from operating the way it should. And so all of those issues should be addressed while you're younger too. And by the way, car accidents and things like that do happen even to young people. Yeah. Terry Schiavo is a good example. If you'll remember, she was a school teacher who had, I believe it was a stroke of some type, but she was actively a school teacher and she was brain dead. And the families ended up fighting over whether to pull the plug, and nobody could do anything.
So we're alluding to the word that we haven't said yet, and that is a will, right? So if you're young or a senior, you should be thinking about how to keep your affairs in order, correct?
Well, yes, you should always be keeping your affairs in order. The concept of a will is a little illusory to what really plays out. The reality is everybody dies. Not everybody pays taxes, but everybody sooner or later dies. Now, the problem there is when and under what circumstance. If you don't have a will, which is a will is something that you declare, you make up where you want things to go. If you don't make that choice, the state makes the choice for you. Now, there's a body of law that establishes a pecking order of sorts as to go to your wife first, or perhaps, but not always. And it might go to your children normally, and then your parents, and then the cousins, but it has a pecking order. But that's very arbitrary in terms of what you want to happen for your estate. So you have to make that decision. The only way to make that decision is to do it with a well thought out will.
Okay, a legal instrument that says the state might do this, but this is exactly what I want to do with my affairs.
That's right. You're stating your position. One of the other problems we've run into recently is, of course, there are companies that do wills online. The problem is, while the mechanics of that are sound, the guidance isn't. The reality is most people don't understand the mechanics. We had a case not too long ago where someone willed their house to, I believe it was the girlfriend, but that's a whole nother story.
That sounds like that is a juicy story.
Well, the point was that was binding, except for the fact that since the guy was married, he couldn't leave the house to anyone.
Right. But the online software allowed him to do that.
And he didn't know the difference.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have to get good advice when it comes to doing a will. It's not just about the paperwork.
But the core is have a will. But many people are either afraid to kind of just contemplate that or get into the details of having a will in place. So many of us are out there in the world with, I'll call it naked. They're naked of a legal representation for what they want after life. Correct?
Understood. You are correct.
And so the word probate comes in after that, which is the state would determine where your stuff and your affairs are going. Correct?
Well, that's the court process. A will in of itself is not self-executing. In other words, it just says what you want, but it still has to go through the probate process, which is a court process whereby somebody becomes a personal representative to take care of the details. The details are brought before the court. The will is filed with the court. And based on what that will says, there may be people who don't agree with what the will says. Errant children that got cut out of the will, and they might want to fight about it. So the will in of itself doesn't do anything. It only tells the judge what you want done.
During the probate process.
That's correct.
Okay.
The problem with the probate process is it's expensive. A will is cheap on the front end, but expensive on the back end. There are ways to avoid that.
All right. So I do want to kind of have a basis of understanding the probate process and a will and how that may simplify probate. But what I really want to kind of get into with you is how that's going to affect the sale of a home, because that's what the show is really about. So if you have parents that passed away and you are now supposed to be in charge of cleaning up their affairs, which may be selling the house that they lived in, and there's no will, what does that leave the children to deal with? And how could they potentially avoid that?
Well, often they don't deal with it. Often the children, now they're older. They're maybe your age, maybe my age, maybe younger. But in any case, they will often continue to pay the mortgage and stay in the house and live there. And this might go on for months or 10 or 20 or 30 years. And they don't realize they can't sell the house. And that's the bottom line. Without having gone through probate, you cannot sell a house. So it should be started early on for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is you could take the tax deduction. You could do what's necessary to do. But a probate has to be opened up at the time that often the real estate agent comes by, because the theoretic homeowner, the person living in the house, says, I want to sell this house. And then you have to look them square in the face and say, by the way, you don't own this house.
Sometimes it's difficult to truly understand what the picture is, and we even get told things that may not be accurate by the person that is currently living in that house.
They don't know.
So to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, the key is to look at public records, see who is on deed for that property, and that really determines what currently the governing bodies believe is the ownership of that property, correct?
That's half an answer.
Okay.
The rest of the answer is what people normally will look at is the tax roll. Now, the tax roll has got 15 or 20 blanks that the tax department fills in as to who the owner is, but that is not necessarily an accurate reflection of all of the people. If you owned a house with me and our partner in something, we might have 50 individual letters that won't show up in a tax record. You'd have to go to the actual deed to see who owns it and whether those people own it in tenancy in common, or joint tenancy, or tenancy by the entireties are three separate concepts. Entireties is for married people. Joint tenancy is for relatives that the other side will get it. The other party will get it upon their death. Mm-hmm. Tenants in common is the biggest problem because it makes the property a piece of the pie. So if you and I were to go into a partnership and buy a house together, we would have a problem because if I died, you would be in partners with my wife.
Got it. So it kind of it's a line of inheritance.
That's right.
So this is a concept that an expert truly needs to look at on an individual basis. We don't have that time here today to do that, but you're the person that they should be going to, right? You have expertise in this, and you have solved issues of probate as they occur, correct?
As a general proposition, that's right. Although the older I get, the more I realize how little I know. I only wish I was 22 again when I knew everything.
I think I knew everything at 22
that's right.
as well.
Now I can't figure out what time it is.
I think the only way to really try to make this issue come to life is to talk about some real world issues. One of which we have a client in common where there were some things that were going on. We might want to touch upon there, but I'm going to leave it to you. What's a good example of how the probate process can get in the way of a real estate sale that you find interesting and informative?
Well, as I indicated before, just because a person is living in the house and they think they own the house because they've been paying the mortgage doesn't necessarily mean they own the house. At very least, in a probate situation, with or without a will, it still has to go through the probate process, which can take many months. There are several ways where you can literally avoid the entire probate process, at least as to the real estate.
Please tell. How do you do it?
You want my secrets?
Yeah. Well,
there's a couple
high level.
There's a couple of secrets. One is there's a couple of problems that you run into because most people, and we're talking about homes here where people have homestead exemptions. There's a thing called a quitclaim deed, which just transfers to you what I might own. Or what I might have title to. So if I say I have title to the Brooklyn Bridge, I can give you a quitclaim deed and you would own what I owned, which in this case is nothing. And that happens far too often.
Thanks for nothing, by the way.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Brooklyn Bridges out there.
Yes.
Owners, anyhow. The other is a life estate deed.
Okay.
Well, a life estate deed will cure the probate problem because it theoretically says that upon my passing, you automatically own it. You own what's called a future interest. So if I pass away, I cease to exist. Therefore, I own it for my life, but when my life ceases, you own it. The problem is, if I ever want to sell that, I need your permission because you own a future interest. I own the present interest. Now, there's even a way around that. It's not correctly applicable in all states because every state regulates their own real estate transactions. But it's called a ladybird deed. It got the word ladybird. Lady Bird Johnson, I think, was the first person that ever used it, the president's wife.
And how does that instrument affect real estate?
Well, it allows us to do a variation on a life estate deed. The difference is I don't need your permission to sell it. During my life, I maintain that property with the homestead exemption, with both the tax and the protection from creditors exemption. And automatically upon my death, once the death certificate is recorded, you got it. In total, nothing else to do, no probate. You've spent a couple of $100 in exchange for having to have spent perhaps several $1,000s on the probate process.
That seems to be a wonderful instrument, the ladybird deed.
It is if you know about it.
That's exactly right. So most of the time I'm in real estate, when you see things that are changing within families or upon death, I see a lot of quitclaim deeds rather than this ladybird deed. Why do you believe that is?
Because people have heard of quitclaim deeds. Now, the problem with the quitclaim deed is it divests the owner, me, of the property. Now you've got it. Well, you might not be so nice to me. You're my grandfather, or I'm your grandfather, and you say, I liked you while you were alive, but I got the property, so I can sell it, or I can mortgage it, you say. And what's more is I've lost my homestead exemption.
Got it.
So there's a lot of problems with quitclaim deeds, but it's the most common form of transfer of property. It's primarily used in divorce situations where two people split up and one says, you got the dog and I got the house.
It seems like a fair trade,
well,
right?
It seems to some it is.
So can you give us a real world example of how this might play out? Because it doesn't happen often, but when it does, a real estate agent typically is not in tune with this type of legality. And so it throws a wrench into things. Often it means, hey, we've got a contract that says it's supposed to close on, April the 1st, April Fool's Day. I did that on purpose. And it never does because the probate process can drag this out for months or even years, correct?
It can, especially if it's adversarial in the probate process. A long time ago when I was young, I learned that I didn't know everything about everything. And I learned that every good entrepreneur doesn't do everything themselves. They learn to surround themselves with people who know how to do everything about everything. And so teamwork is essential. Your question goes to, as a realtor, how would you know whether, and how would you anticipate this? Well, the best way to anticipate everything is having a good team around you, an accountant, an attorney who could either check it out or could point you on things you might want to check out. The one thing you don't want to do as the person selling the property, as the realtor, is you don't want to assume that the person who's telling you that they own the house actually owns the house. It will get both parties in trouble. It wastes the time of the realtor, and it frustrates the owner who thinks that they own the house.
Absolutely. So again, trying to find a real world example, and I know that it may take you a second to kind of come up with that. Something that's happened relatively recently that comes to mind that really illustrates the frustration that a family could have, or something where you were very successful in turning it around and solving a probate issue.
Well, we've done it on both sides of it. Just recently, we had a client come in that was referred to actually from a realtor, and said, we have this property. How can I make arrangements so that my family can get it? I said, well, you can do a will, and again, inexpensive on the front end, very expensive on the back end. Or you can do ladybird deed or a life estate deed, and it eliminated the whole problem. By doing that, it was both effective for the realtor who referred the client, and it was effective for the homeowner and the children in avoiding unnecessary expense and aggravation. The flip side of that is when someone comes to our office and says, my parents passed away, my father passed away, my mother inherited the house, my mother is now got Alzheimer's. She cannot, once she's got Alzheimer's and incapable of making decisions,
right,
do a durable power of attorney, which would have given someone the authority. Perhaps the best example I can give you, and it's a real world example, it happened to me. My mother had Alzheimer's. She did have the foresight to make the three children, not her beneficiary, but her in charge of her durable power of attorney. So when she got Alzheimer's, it's not a probate situation, but it's an incapacity situation. The children had the power to make decisions on her behalf. So it's not just about when you die. It's also about when you live in terms of solving problems. We've had many situations where people wanted to sell the house and the children genuinely thought they owned the property. I've got one right now that we're having to actually, mom invested in the house with the daughter. Because it was a mother-daughter relationship, not a marriage situation, they were tenants in common. So technically the child owned 50% of the property. The mother
Mom
owned
did.
50% of the property. Mom passed away. Daughter can't sell the house. And to make it
Because it's burdened by the 50% interest that the mother had,
right,
which is now caught up in a probate situation.
that's right.
Wow. So the daughter really has put herself into a bind. Okay.
Unintentionally.
Right.
It was just mom helping out daughter. But the way they titled the property was as tenants in common.
Got it. Actually, we're going to take a quick break. I do see a question. The question is, what happens if there's a person who has a property? Oops, hang on. We just lost that. Can you use Ladybird when the person has a reverse mortgage on the home? And then can you assign multiple people on an instrument like that?
Reverse mortgages are a fairly modern creature. You can sell the house, or assuming that the house is sellable and assuming there's equity in it. That's the assumption that the whole reverse mortgage was created. Back in 08, it created a problem because now the value of the property was less than the mortgage that was on the property.
Right.
So people went into foreclosure on that just because don't leave me a piece of property that has got a bigger mortgage than it's worth.
Exactly.
The theory is the property is going to be worth more, and later down the road you would pay it off. So what the beneficiary inherits is actually the property subject to the mortgage.
Got it.
So what I might inherit from someone who passed away and had a reverse mortgage is a piece of property worth X value. But if that value was being exceeded by the amount of the mortgage had to be paid off, usually within 90 days or so of the time of death. And who wants to pay off a mortgage when the mortgage is more expensive than the house is worth?
Right.
And that creates a problem.
Of course. So let's try to avoid some problems for the people that are out there. And, they now listen to this and they go, wow, this is something that I just didn't know about, and I'm enlightened at this point. If somebody was to come to you and say, listen, I don't want to have these problems in the future, either for myself or for parents or brother or sister, generically, where do you start with somebody? What would you tell them to do to kind of position themselves to be in good shape should something like this come into the family situation?
I wish I would have known this when I was 20. But
We're always back to 20 or 22.
Because I knew everything there, or at least I thought I did,
right.
But I didn't know a whole lot of anything.
Right.
The best solution is to walk around the car and make sure the tires are filled.
Sure.
It prevents accidents. The best solution is to put a seatbelt on, which takes no effort, which saves lives. Likewise, the best situation is to surround yourself with the people that you need in your life. And that means give us a call. Come in on a consultation, couple of bucks, it costs you. But we sit there and we outline everything that people at the given stage of life need to understand, not act on necessarily.
Have a will.
Maybe.
Potentially, right? Have medical directive, have maybe
power of attorney,
yep.
Have a living will. And there's a difference between, and sometimes people will ask me about, well, what are trusts? There's two kinds of trust. One's a living trust or a revocable trust, and the other is an irrevocable trust. The difference, in its simplest form, a will is cheap on the front end. It's very expensive on the back end. A trust is more expensive on the front end because it takes a lot more work, but there's nothing on the back end.
It just, you're no longer there, and the people in the trust take over.
That's right. Now, the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable is just like it sounds. Revocable, the person who owns whatever can revoke the trust and change it to someone else. Irrevocable is you're literally giving away the asset, which is often a technique used, especially for asset protection purposes, as well as estate planning purposes.
Got it. We do have another question. Patty asks, is the Ladybird deed necessary when the property is in a family trust?
Well, that depends on the type of trust it is.
Okay.
Patty.
You can follow up with additional parts of your question, Patty, if you can.
Yeah.
But we're trying to obviously address anything that comes in, and we appreciate your questions.
But the answer is you should never put your home in a revocable trust, or in an irrevocable trust, because either it's not your home anymore because it's irrevocable, or it's revocable, but if it goes out of your name, you lose your homestead exemption, which should be avoided. If it is in the trust, it might well avoid probate. In fact, often does, but it cuts off certain benefits right now that usually people are important to people. Things like a cap. Florida's got two different types of issues. You've got the homestead exemption, which is X amount of dollars knocked off of your taxes. But maybe the more important of the two is, and it does have a limit, but it caps the increase that the county could increase your tax base to.
We like caps in that regard.
It was a great proposition when it came up. It's not there with commercial property. So if you owned a rent house doesn't have the same cap that commercial does. As a result, rental property tends to escalate much quicker on the tax roll than does your own home that's had the homestead exemption in place.
Absolutely. So we've been pretty serious during this time together online. Yeah, we've been pretty serious. And you and I know each other through a number of different ways. You're a fun guy too. So besides the attorney work that we talked about, on the show, what else do you do? And what makes, Dennis a different kind of guy and a fun guy?
Probably I didn't go to law school right out of high school or college. In fact, I was a naval aviator in my early days, and I continued that passion. I was a New York stage designer, worked on Grease and several other shows, Dames at Sea, and in New York. And so I've done a lot of things over my lifetime. And I try to involve myself. But one of the advantages of going to law school later in life, I think I was 34 at the time, was that what I brought to the table was common sense that doesn't always exist when someone who's 22 goes to law school. They bring their book learning. I brought the common sense to the book learning. And so that tends to broaden out my ability to relate to people and what they do.
And you and I have talked about this, but I'd love to share with the audience. You fly, right?
Oh, I've maintained it. I've been flying for 52 years.
What do you fly and how often?
Well, it's anything somebody will pay for the gas on. I have my own plane, but it's in large part because it's my station wagon, and I use it to do hearings throughout the state. And I've flown it all over the country, to Alaska, New York. But you
haven't offered me a ride yet.
I've offered you a ride. Don't say that. You can have a ride anytime you want. But it's a functional thing. There's 8,000 general aviation airports and only 80 commercial airports. And right now, especially, it's advantageous because of the COVID situation.
Sure.
If I need to go somewhere, I go.
That's great. So attorneys can be fun. They don't just have to, sit there and look at paperwork and give you their findings and their readings on things. You are a very approachable person. I can tell you that from many interactions I've had and people that I know that have worked with you. We certainly appreciate what you're telling us here. Anything else you want to just tell people out there? What should they be thinking when they're really focused on their home, which typically is when they buy it, so that they can be prepared to sell it right?
Well, that's more of a real estate question than it is. I was a realtor before I was an attorney.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I just asked that. Another thing that we can highlight in your career.
Yeah. It's a piece of property. It's a piece of real property, and you need to be careful about over improving or under improving a property. You need to be careful about making it smell like baking bread when you show the property. But most important is the things that you don't see. And those are often the legal issues. They can involve accounting, they can involve law. But for every person that wants to hold on to their money, the best way to hold on to your money is to think it through with other professionals, whether it's a financial planner, an attorney, your realtor, who can advise you in the best capacity as to what you have to think through in advance, and make money.
Great.
Enjoy life and make your home your castle.
Agreed. I really appreciate everybody who's tuned in and those that will watch on demand. As always, I am Hal Feldman, the MiamiHal Real Estate Show. I'm here for your real estate dreams. And if those dreams start to look like they might be a little bit of a nightmare, you might be wanting to get in touch with my friend Dennis Haber here. He also can keep those all those bad things from happening in the first place.
Yeah,
So,
don't let it become a nightmare. Call me first.
all right. Until next week.